Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout New Vegas, where we've got another new tier list. I've been getting a lot of requests recently to go over the armor in New Vegas, and I've been meaning to do it, I just haven't gotten around to it. So first up, we're going to be taking a look at the heavy armor in New Vegas, and starting us off, we've got the metal armor. The metal armor is probably the most common heavy armor that you're going to find throughout the Wasteland. Raiders have it fairly often, you can buy it from traders, and honestly, the metal armor is not really that great. I would kind of just forego grabbing it at all with any sort of character unless you're just going with a dedicated heavy armor build or something like that, and you are really dead set on just using heavy armor in your playthrough, because otherwise usually medium armor is kind of better than this, and even some light armor is better than this. It has a damage threshold of 12, which isn't super high. It's got fairly low item health, and it comes with some downsides. One of the major downsides to heavy armor is the weight. Usually you're taking heavy armor because you want a lot of damage threshold and you are okay with using up the weight. So the weight isn't such a big deal with these. This does weigh 30, so it is still pretty hefty. You're not going to be able to carry very many of these around. However, you are going to be able to repair this fairly easy. And the other downside to this is that it comes with -1 agility. Minusing your agility kind of sucks because agility is a pretty important combat stat for just about any sort of build. It dictates how much action points you have available, so if you're using a VATS build, this can be a downside. It also dictates how fast you can reload your weapons, which is also usually a downside with the majority of weapons. Unless, of course, you're using something like a melee or an unarmed build, in which case then it's just the action point costs that are kind of a problem. The metal armor, though, I would say is probably the weakest of the heavy armors that we got to talk about today, and I'd put it right down into D tier. I really don't think it's that great. Then we've got the metal armor reinforced, and reinforced is quite a bit better than regular armor. This has 16 damage threshold, so a bit more. It's still not on the high side, though. That's still not really that high for heavy armor. It's about what a lot of medium armors get up to. Still weighs a lot, coming in at 30, still has the -1 agility. This one does have more item health and you can repair it with regular metal armor, so there's no reason not to upgrade to this if you have the extra money or if you just find it laying on the ground. That being said, though, I would still forego getting this in favor of a lot of the other armors that we have available, and I think I'd also just put this one into D tier. It's definitely higher than regular metal armor. Up next, we once again have the metal armor and the reinforced metal armor, but this is the Gecko-backed metal armor. You can only technically make this in Honest Hearts, although you don't actually have to go to the DLC, you just have to interact with a campfire. And for this, you need the various tanned gecko skins, which can be kind of a process of getting those because you need multiple of them, and sometimes turpentine is kind of hard to find for tanning them as well. And then you just piece it together with this. This does weigh slightly more than the other versions of the metal armor. Regular metal armor with the gecko back weighs 33 rather than 30. This defends you 17, so this is better than the reinforced armor, and it does come with a new host of advantages. It still has the -1 agility, which kind of sucks, but it does have +15 to your fire, poison, and radiation resist. Those are kind of useful. There's not a whole lot of enemies that generally use fire, so that one's kind of okay. There's not a whole lot of enemies that use poison either, so that one's also just kind of okay. Radiation resist is going to be the best from this, and having +15 is nice. Having decent item health and decent armor makes this one all around okay. I think it pales in comparison, though, to the leather armor that you can do the same thing with, and we'll talk about that once we do the light armor tier list. But this one I would say is like C tier. It's much better than the regular metal armor, like quite a bit better, but it's not amazing still. You probably don't want to go out of your way to make this. Then we have the Gecko-backed metal armor reinforced. So this one is just like the previous armor that we talked about. So it has all the same bonuses to it, has all the same negatives. This one has even more item health. It weighs even more, coming in at 35, and it defends even more than the rest of the armors that we've talked about here, coming in at 20 damage threshold. That is okay, and I think I'd put this one like B tier. It is quite a step up. Having 20 defense is getting on par with a lot of other heavy armors, or about that. Having its own unique bonuses is pretty good. It still has the -1 agility, though, which kind of sucks, and it's not one of the strongest heavy armors, but it might be okay to go out of your way to get because it at least feels somewhat rewarding. Our next heavy armor is the NCR Salvaged Power Armor. This one's interesting because it's the only power armor that you don't need power armor training to actually put on, which is great. It does come with some bonuses like power armor, where it has 20 damage threshold, so pretty good. It's got high item health, which is great, and it weighs 40, which is kind of on par with a lot of power armor. This one does come with the major downside of -2 agility, so it's even worse for basically every sort of combat build. It is tankier, but this one is pretty underwhelming. It also technically counts as NCR armor, so once you put this on, you then become part of the NCR faction, or at least are seen like that. So if you're against Caesar's Legion, that won't be an issue. And it can potentially be a bonus if you're against the NCR and you just want to wear this so that you can sneak into areas or just wander around places without getting shot by them. So it does have some use there, but this one still isn't that great. I'd put it like C tier. It's better than the metal armors, but by the time you're getting this, it's kind of on par with the metal armors too, in terms of what other things you could get, unless you're just rushing through the storyline. Our next armors are the regular power armors that you can get, and there's technically two versions of this. There is standard power armor, and there is Brotherhood power armor. There's no difference between them at all, besides that if you wear the Brotherhood armor, it is considered a faction armor. If you're wearing the standard power armor, it is not considered a faction armor. The first armor we have is the T-45d armor. This one is pretty common for you to get. This one has 22 damage threshold, so pretty good. It has a huge amount of item health like you'd expect from power armor. This one does weigh 45, so it is on the heftier side even for heavy armor. And this one does come with a +2 strength bonus, which is really good, and a -2 agility penalty, which is not very good. This one is still pretty strong though, and I would consider it a good heavy armor, but I don't think it's one of the best heavy armors if you're just looking for raw stats. If you're running, let's say, like a melee build with this one can be a bit better, since strength does dictate how much melee damage you do, unless you already have very high strength, in which case then the +2 strength doesn't really help, and the -2 agility will hurt you. I'm going to put this one B tier as well. I guess I'll put it above the metal armor, but it's not that much higher than it. Let's move on to the next power armor, which is the T-51b armor. And this one I would say is a bit better, because this one has even higher damage threshold than the previous armor that we talked about. This one has 25, which is pretty cool. It also has double the amount of item health to it, which is great. Power armor already has pretty high health, so having even more is awesome. And this one doesn't have any sort of downside with it. It only has upsides. Well, besides, I guess, the weight, which is 40, so it's even lighter than the previous armor we talked about. This one gives you a +1 strength bonus, which is fantastic, and a +25 radiation resistance. This one is just all around really good. I would recommend this one up into A tier, maybe into S tier. It's one of the best heavy armors in the game. It's also generic, which is great because you can repair it a little bit easier, at least if you're not going with something like jury rigging. If you have jury rigging, then that doesn't really matter if you have a unique thing or not. But if you're not going with that particular perk, then this one is a really good option because it's not impossible to find these. You can find them fairly often, or you can find power armor fairly often so that you can fix this if it actually gets damaged enough that you're going to have to worry about that. Up next we have the Legate's armor, and the Legate's armor kind of sucks, which I guess is okay because you can't technically get this in the game. You can get his helmet, but you can't actually get his armor unless you use a console command to get it in, but it is in the game, so I figured I would include it on this list. If you do want to spawn it in, it does look really cool. The mask and the armor looks awesome, but its stats are pretty bad. It has 15 damage threshold, being one of the lowest of the heavy armors. Does not have any bonuses to it whatsoever, so you don't get pluses or minuses to anything. And it weighs 45, so it's one of the heaviest armors too with the least amount of actual protection. This one is actually like D tier if you would like to use it. It's about on par with the metal armors. There's no point using it. Even if it was in the game, it wouldn't matter because by the time you're killing the Legate, there's only a handful more of enemies that you could kill. The only way you are going to be able to use this is to spawn it in, and for it being like the end game boss armor, it's really underwhelming. I mean, the Legate isn't, but his armor isn't really that great in terms of stats. Our next armor is the armor of the 87th Tribe. This one is very similar to the Legate's armor. It's based heavily off of that. This one you can only get at the end of the Lonesome Road, and you have to nuke Caesar's Legion in order to go to the area to kill this guy and get his armor. This one is pretty decent though in terms of stats. This one has a 22 damage threshold, so pretty good, about on power level armor, which is great. Has a ton of health. It takes forever for this thing to break. It also only weighs 35, so it is actually one of the lighter armors too, which is really good. And it has some unique bonus effects too, where it gives you +1 charisma, +3% crit chance, and +10 action points. That is really good. That is actually really, really good. Extra action points is good on any sort of VATS build, or any sort of build that likes to use VATS a lot. Even if you're using like melee, you're probably going to use VATS a lot. Crit chance is great on basically every build besides explosives. And charisma is just a bonus extra speech and barter check, so that's pretty nice. The only downside to this one is actually getting it. This one is probably one of the best heavy armors too. I'd probably put this one up into A tier. I don't know if I'd put it quite up into S tier. I'd put it above the standard power armor though. Let's take a look at these other ones. And for some reason I have double of the armor here, so we're just gonna have to ignore one of these. Let's put that one down there just so it gets out of the way. Let's talk about the Remnants Power Armor. The Remnants Power Armor can only be obtained from completing a quest, and you do have to complete Ganon's quest, so you do have to get his companionship all the way up. That can be somewhat of a hassle. It depends. Sometimes, it really depends on how far along you are into the story. what other side quests you may have done. It is kind of useful to go out of your way to do the side quests, at least for the companions, because I think they're all pretty good. And this is one of the rewards that you can get from this. Now this one has the highest amount of defense out of any of the armors in the game. This one has 28 damage threshold. This one doesn't have the most amount of item health though. It actually breaks faster than any of the other power armors that we've talked about. This one also weighs 45, similar to some of the other power armors. And this one does have 2 unique bonuses to it where you get a +1 strength to it, which is nice, and you get +15 radiation resist, which is also pretty good. This one can be pretty good, and it's definitely like your best bet if you just want to go full tank mode with the power armor. This one is going to be your best option just because it has the highest amount of defense. So I think I'd put this one up into S tier, but it's honestly just kind of barely making it to S tier. And I might move this one up because it's pretty similar and it's a pretty good option too. But I'll put the Remnants armor up there because it is just a bonus. It's a really cool suit of power armor, and it's a really cool callback to the power armor in Fallout 2. And then our final armor is the Scorched Sierra Power Armor. This one you can only get from nuking the NCR at the end of Lonesome Road. Now you can nuke both the Legion and the NCR if you want. That's an option too. And this one has high defenses too. This one has 24 damage threshold, which is great. It has high item health, not as high as some of these other options that we've talked about, but it's more than the regular T-45 armor, which is great. This one also weighs 40, so about the same as power armor, which you kind of expect. And this one has 3 effects to it. It has a +1 strength, which is great. It has +25% fire resist on it, which is good. Again, there's not a whole lot of things that actually use fire in this game. It's going to be like fire ants and fire geckos, and that's usually about it. Most enemies aren't using flamers and stuff. There's a couple that do, but it's not a common weapon. And then it also has a +2 HP regen on it. This is every second, so every second you're getting 2 health back. That is pretty nice. This one's actually pretty good. I would say this one's probably S tier too. The utility from it is great, and it has a decent amount of defenses to it. I think I'm also going to move the armor of the 87th tribe up into S tier too. I think it's kind of fitting with these other armors. These are probably going to be your like premier armors, but they are all usually endgame, where all 3 of these are tied to either a main DLC quest or a side quest. If you're just going for strong armor that you want, that's heavy armor, then I would say the T-51b is probably the best overall armor that you can get throughout most of the game. But that's not saying that you can't go and get these early and get a little bit of a bonus there. And that'll do it for all of the heavy armors in New Vegas. There's actually not a whole lot of them. Tell me your thoughts on the heavy armors down in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.